a few minutes ago that when we talk about post-release support for a game, it usually means different things regarding whether or not you're thinking about things from a live service perspective. And live service games are titles that are built around kind of constant or consistent monetization. So, free to play games, mobile games, and even some of the bigger and quote unquote, I guess, high quality AAA games that we've seen, such as in my thumbnail for Marvel's Avengers. And post release support is something that has become, I think, more and more important to consider in the last, let's say, maybe I think 5, 6 years, I think safely, about how much things have changed and what people expect from a multiplayer or just from a game in general in today's market.
Yeah, I just noticed a big issue.
Mm-mm.
Um, Everything was muted up to this point on my side. I'm going to have to get
Oh,
a copy of yours and edit that in the first party on my
uh,
side.
folks, we've started off 2021, I think, properly. My show on Thursday didn't record right, and now forgot to turn the audio on his side. So we're really batting 1,000, I think, for 2021 so far.
No, we're batting 2020 for
Yeah.
21.
All right, but yeah. So as I was saying, with post-release support, I guess here's my question for you, Shark, and this will also be for the audience watching live or recorded. What do you think is the major distinction between a live service game and a game which has post-release support?
Well, a live service game needs to have a financial model. Well, they both need to have financial models, but they need to have it's different financial models for each one. A live service is meant to get ongoing revenue for the life of the game. That 30 years from now, in theory, it could keep on going if it had that kind of staying power anyway. But in theory, it could. Where a post support game would not have that. It would have, I mean, it would still have a model built that would, have staying power kind of thing. But it would probably be a one time purchase kind of thing, but it would be a purchase of a greater amount generally.
Mm-hmm. So here's, I guess, to follow up on that question for you. Would you consider Dead by Daylight to be either post-release support or more along the lines of live service?
I haven't played it, so I don't know.
Hmm. Well, with Dead by Daylight, their main monetization model is releasing these quote unquote chapters that add in a new character, a new map, and a new like killer for people to play as.
Well, that would be DLC, wouldn't it?
Kind of. It seems to be more along
Or
the lines.
expansion.
Yeah. Now, Payday 2 would be, I think, another interesting one because it is predominantly a player versus the environment or PvE game, but they had extensive DLC put out for it to the point that they did post release support for, I want to say, 5 years. Then they stopped. Then the company almost went bankrupt, and then they started again.
Yeah. Well, DLC could be a way that you fund post release support, but remember, post release support isn't the DLC itself. The DLC is funding methods
Mm-hmm.
to supply to be able to continue development. It doesn't have to, it could just be money for the studio kind of thing, but you could use it to fund other stuff for the main game, the non DLC version. But that said, is early access is not post production.
No.
Your 1.0 needs to be solid and it needs to be complete. You
Yeah.
know,
And I think that's I think a really good point to segue into the first big thing or the first thing you need to understand. When we talk about post-release support, we're not talking about fixing your game after launch. Your game has to be stable at launch. So, like right now, all the work that's going with Cyberpunk 2077, that's not post-release support. That is,
Early access.
yeah, or like the equivalent of trying to use buckets to get water off a sinking ship kind of situation.
Yeah. And same thing goes with Fallout 76. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's not post-release support. That is, bucket slash early access.
And don't forget No Man's Sky as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
this is something. Yeah.
one thing we need to definitely clarify here is that if you release in a state where it requires buckets to get, the water off slash early access kind of thing, and you released as a 1.0 kind of thing, then you're never going to do post-release support. Because the fact is nobody's going to realize the difference between you fixing everything and you adding in what was supposed to be there in the first place, and you continuing to add in stuff past 1.0 because you've already added 1.0 and now you're putting out fires. So there is no post-release support for you, despite if you plan to do it or not. Even if you do it, it's not going to be seen that way. It's going to be more putting out the fires, more early access kind of thing in your post, your non early access.
Yeah. Now, the thing about what we're discussing is that post-release support is different when we're talking about a single-player title versus a multiplayer one. When we're discussing single player, this can be either in the form of free content or with DLC or quote unquote expansions. But again, regardless of how you're developing this, the game has to be in a stable state at 1.0. One of the easiest ways to sync a game post launch or sync a game that you're trying to develop long term, is to say 1.0 is horrible, but don't worry, we'll fix it by version 2.6. That will be the safe version to start playing our game. And some of you may be thinking that never happens, but no, we've seen developers make that mistake, such as
Hundreds of times.
such as Evolve. That when it was released, a lot of people bounced off of it, and developers had to course correct, and it just never managed to right that ship.
Mm-hmm. You know, Kerbal did the same thing kind of thing because like they released their 1.0, which was worse than their point 0.9. It broke a whole bunch of things and it added basically nothing. And you know, and it was not a complete game either. It didn't have any onboarding, it didn't have anything hardly. It was still very much an early access kind of thing. And you know, you don't want to call it early access version 1.0.
Yeah. Planetary Annihilation, for instance, when they went to 1.0, their grand campaign wasn't done, and you literally couldn't save your game in single player. That was a bonus feature that had to be added in afterward.
Yeah, and the thing is if you run into the problem that Kerbal ran into, which may have been engineered to begin with, but that's a completely other point. But like, if you run into the problem they have of being on point 0.9 and going up by 10 every time you do a major release kind of thing, don't do 1.0. Do point, you know, do point 19, do point 20 instead of 9, you know, instead of, well, they did like 0.9, 0.91, 0.92, and then they would release 1.0. Don't do that. Do, after that, go, if you're not ready, do 0.0100 instead of 91. Just, take those two numbers, 91, 92, and go up to 100, but still leave it behind the decimal.
Mm-hmm.
Until you actually have a real 1.0 where you put that 1 in front of the decimal.
And again, when you're trying to consider or you want to do this kind of thing, it really comes down to what kind of content your game is about and where you can go from there. So, an example that I like from this year is from Atomicron. This was released, let me see, when did it come out on Steam? Steam release was September 17th, and it was released on early access, I think, a few months prior to that. Or, I'm sorry, on Epic, a few months. And Atomic Crops at 1.0 was a finished game. It was done. Was it the best game? No. But it was a game that, from beginning to end, had a complete gameplay loop. And what they've done since then is release, I want to say, 2, maybe 3 major updates to the game that have changed how things work. They've added new content, they've added new systems, and it's made the game bigger than it was at 1.0. And that's ultimately what, when we talk about post-release support, your overall goal, you're trying to make a good game better. You don't want to make a good game worse, and like we said earlier, post-release support is not making a bad game good.
Or making an incomplete game complete.
Yes.
It should be a complete game, and it should be good, and your post-release support is making it better.
Now, of course, you can fix issues that come up, bugs, quality of life issues, that stuff is for sure.
Oh, you should be doing that either way.
Yeah. But what we're focused on specifically for our show today is content-wise. What are you adding to this game that's going to make it different from 1.0? And like I said a few minutes ago, this is something that 10 years, I think, ago, maybe a little bit less than that, people weren't really considering this. Whenever I play Left 4 Dead with Thorn and a few of the guys, we always mention that Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2 came out this very weird, awkward period when it came to game development, where, in that period and before that, post-release support was no such thing. It was, I release this game, now I release a sequel, or I make a brand new game. Today, this option of saying, okay, my game is done, why don't I just keep making more for it, is now a valid option or a viable one. But it's still something you need to really weigh the pros and cons of when you're developing your game. And before I stop talking, again, this is another major point. You need to consider whether or not you're going to post-release support during development. You don't want to wait until the game is at 1.0 and then say, do I want to keep making stuff for it?
Yeah. And, the thing is maybe in certain edge cases, maybe you would want to decide that maybe right before release. Not like super before release, but like towards the end, in the last, I don't know, 3 to 4 months of development, because you might be like at your limit to where this is all we can do. This is all we can do right now. There's a lot of things we want to do to add to this, but this is all we can do right now because we don't have funds to keep on going. This is a complete game kind of thing, but there's other stuff we want to do. We don't want to, and for right now, it's dropped off our list. But because we don't have time or funds to do it, but we want to do it. So like, if the cells be willing, kind of thing, we will continue working on it with post-release support.
And this was something that I spoke with Chris Park about several times with some of his games that he developed. That he always looked at his games at being these very, like, I'm not sure if insular is the word I want to look at, compartmentalized in terms of its content. That at 1.0, this is my game, this is what it is, it's perfect. And now I have all this ancillary stuff that it would be cool to have, but it's not needed. Like, the game does not need this content. It would make it better, but this is still a completed game. And what you would do is basically say, okay, we're going to work on this batch of content for our first expansion or DLC. If it sells well, we'll move on to batch number 2. If batch number 1 fails, then maybe people don't want more content, so we're done with the game at that point.
And of course, putting out these updates and everything can but no, not necessarily will, but they can potentially bring more traffic to your store, making you sell more copies, potentially. But it can also do absolutely nothing.
Yeah. And that's another very important point you need to consider. That post-release support, at the end of the day, it's about keeping your game's kind of commercial lifespan up. Because once your game is finished development, I mean, like completely we're done, no more bug fixes, no more content, your game is basically, died or dead in the market. Unless, somebody decides to pick it up many, many years from now, people aren't going to be looking for your game. The algorithm is not going to be promoting it because what else is there to promote with it? And when post release support works, as Shark said, it keeps people coming back to your game. It keeps people talking about it, which means people are going to keep making content about it. And they keep making content about it means that there's going to be more traffic surrounding your game.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, when post-release support works, as with a live service game, it can become almost a metaphorical, way to print money for your title. That you put out more content, people keep buying it, and why should I risk going to another game when my first game is just keeps bringing in money like this?
Well, let's keep in mind that that's DLC and stuff is bringing in the money. The post release content is only possibly selling more of the base game,
Yeah.
not necessarily bringing in more money, just bringing in more total volume.
And there is a limit, I think, to these games unless you really want to go the live service route. And that's when we start getting into multiplayer territory. Because here's kind of the dirty secret. If you are making a multiplayer game and you are considering post-release support, then you are making a live service game at that point.
Yeah.
Because everything is feeding into each other. You're doing the post-release support to get out new content. You're going to have to charge people for that content. And the goal is for that content to keep people playing the game so that you're able to keep, the servers on and keep, this multiplayer design functioning.
Yeah, exactly. And that's currently what I'm working on, a live service game, which, has a bad reputation, as does free to play games. And mine is both. And I'm, intending on revolutionizing the industry. Of course, I may just absolutely fail by making this game that is consumer friendly, you know. And of course, when I make it and everything, if it is a huge commercial success and everything, what's going to happen is everybody's going to be like, see that, and be like, oh, I can do that too, kind of thing.
And day.
And and they can't because they're not me.
Yeah.
I could do it because I if it happens, I'm going to do it, kind of thing. But like, everybody has different talents, everybody has different things, and all this different stuff. So like you have to treat life as a game dev as like an RPG. But instead of having like, like what 7, 8 stats that a normal RPG has, you have like 3,000 stats. Which have like, like there's so many different stats under art, there's so many different stats underneath design, there's so many different stats underneath, programming. There's all these different stats all throughout each category, kind of thing. And having certain stats in certain ones and being able to, cross pollinate between skills to basically kind of breed a new skill, essentially. That's what allows you to make your games specially for you that literally nobody else can copy. I mean, they can copy, they can be inspired by it, kind of thing. They can make a clone and, completely miss out the heart of the game, kind of thing. But they can never truly create the exact same thing you did or your team, because you also got to consider the stats of them and how each other's stats coalesce with each other, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And also, your QA team and your testers and all this other stuff. They have stats too that also imply into this, and all these things come together to form your game, kind of thing.
Yeah, and when you're going with post-release support, it means that those people are going to be on your project for a whole lot longer. And part of the challenge, as we said, is where is the money going to come from for post-release support? Because
Mm-hmm.
there are developers who will just release new content for free, whether it is part of their original plan, a way of saying thank you to the community, or as we said earlier, the idea is I'm going to keep working on this game for free, and it's going to bring more eyeballs onto the base game.
But if you're doing post-release support, then you are doing it for free. But that doesn't mean you aren't doing paid stuff on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
You can release post free content kind of thing, and that's post release support, and then pay for that by either getting the new eyeballs on it or by selling a DLC beside it, kind of thing.
Yep, and that's another very interesting point. That's what Overkill did with Payday 2 for the longest time. That they would basically have two tiers of content. Game changing or game system impacting stuff was always free. And then that was funded by basically the mountains and mountains of DLC that they put out almost, I think, it was like every few weeks, every few months.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the strategy that you're trying to come up with when it comes to post release support is what are you hoping to get out of it? Yeah, like as John is saying in chat there, that yes, it would be, in the perfect world, you could just keep working on the same game forever and ever and never have to worry about money. Unfortunately, though, we are still in Nightmare Edition of 2020, so that's not going to be happening anytime soon.
Or, or even back in the 90s, that wouldn't happen. Or the
Mm,
80s. Because you
yeah,
release a game back then and you still can't do it for free.
yeah. And back then, it was a whole lot harder to patch a game that had bugs in it.
Oh, yeah.
Pre-internet.
The internet definitely did a lot there to allow developers to ship their game with bugs.
Mm-hmm.
Man, imagine if LJN had the internet back then. I mean,
Oh God.
would they make good games now? Would they have made good games at that point?
Mm. Maybe one of their games would just literally be like a screen that says placeholder heart, finished version to come 6 months from now.
Oh yeah, they could have done that too. That's
Oh
what
no.
EA and Take Two and whatnot do now, right?
Yeah. It's like, oh no, it's not Jaws coming as it's placeholder art. Final version to come is charging the boat.
Yeah.
And getting back to kind of what we've seen today, or a more modern audiences or modern market, that post-release support, like we've said, has become a very important consideration for a lot of developers. Because being able to put out more content for a game, whether it is promise or just comes as a surprise, becomes a factor in terms of your game development, your marketing strategy. So on my thumbnail, I include, of course, Marvel's The Avenger, or Marvel's Avengers game that seems to be spiraling and spiraling down like every week or so. And here's the problem that this game ran into, is that it is a single player game with a shoehorn multiplayer, and developers basically put all their chips in on trying to expand the multiplayer side of things. And that is kind of a big no-no. And gets at another point about our talk today, that you need to understand what aspects of your game is going to pull people in, and that's what you need to support.
As
Like in a single player game, giving me 50 more cosmetic options that I can't show to anyone, I'm not really going to care about that. Conversely, if you're making a multiplayer game and you say, hey, we just released 5, single player only campaign maps, give us $30 for them. Why should anyone do that?
Yeah. And the other thing is the other issue they had was they weren't a good game at 1.0.
Mm-hmm.
They were a very generic, very bad, poor excuse that didn't even seem like an Avengers game as an Avengers game at 1.0. And here's a question for you, Josh. Do you think all cosmetics need to be able to show off?
Huh. I think in today's market, I don't know, it's tough. Like the mobile game that I played, there's no real PvP in it, but there are like the cosmetic skins, but they change like character animations, they change everything about it. So even though you're not showing it off, it is changing how you would perceive the game. If it was just literally, okay, here's your character in a green and red outfit, now they're in a red and green outfit, then yeah, you have to show that off. If it's something like at like the high point of like, the premium skins of League of Legends or stuff like that, then I think, you can appreciate that as a single player without having to show that stuff off. If it's just for you, that is.
But then I have a question for you on my stuff later because
Mm-mm.
I have one that I'm planning to, I have some that we're going to show off definitely, but I have one specifically that is just a color swap that you're only going to be able to see on yourself side because we have to do that because of the colorblind support and all that, and you can't make it where people can't, you know,
Yeah.
see kind of thing, and yeah. And I'm hoping that will work because I personally think that's really, really awesome to only see on my side. And plus, it makes it better, in my opinion, to be only on one side. Since I've already fully explained it, I'll tell you what it is. It's the neon glow when you place a card out. The ones that you own are going to be glowing blue by default, and the ones that your opponent owns are going to be glowing red. Now, when you download this cosmetic, basically, you're allowed to change the color of the neon glows for both you
Okay.
and your opponent. So you could go like, my cards are purple and my opponent's cards are red, kind of thing,
green
or
blue
green.
or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, and it changes both visuals on your side and it affects none of the visuals on your opponent's side.
That I think skirts that line a little bit. I think some people will like that. I think some people will look at that as saying, that's a great feature. Why the hell are you charging me for it?
Well, you can buy it with free currency, so you don't even have to actually
Yeah.
pay for it.
Yeah. And I think it could work. But like we were saying, when you are considering post support for your game, you have to be planning this stuff out. And here's another very big point. Like we said earlier, 1.0 should be stable. Post support should not be fixing a game. And one of the big reasons why is that if you decide to cancel your post support for whatever reason, let's say it's not bringing in money, the dev teams ran out of ideas, whatever, there still needs to be a completed game. Because if there isn't, then you just ruin your entire game and any chance of it ever earning money again.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen developers do that, such as a few of the Batman games. I think it was Batman Arkham Origins had like a year or so of post support plan, and then they stopped after like 2 or 3 months.
Mm-mm. Yeah, that's not good. You don't want to put out a roadmap of all this stuff you're going to put in and then not put it in.
Mm-hmm. And again, post release support is not supposed to be early access. And we've seen, unfortunately, developers do just that, saying, here's our early access game. Yes, it's terrible, but in 6 years from now, if people donate and buy our game, then it will be good.
Yeah, that's a one man's lie. I mean, no man's sky.
And another aspect of around this, like we've said, is the planning phase. And this is something that on my thumbnail I include Among Us. because this is another very where is getting and this is another very important point you need to consider. Like when we looked at Among Us, for instance, that it when it hit 1.0, it was okay. It was a decent game, but when we were playing this after 2 years of it being out, there were still many issues with it. And as we all know, they were planning on basically just ditching Among Us and then releasing Among Us 2 as kind of the correct edition of the game.
Yeah. If I had to guess, I'm guessing that basically they didn't technically cancel Among Us 2. I think what they did was they're making Among Us 2 to be a new a new version for Among
Yeah.
Us 1.
And that can work, taking the content development and trying to make your first game better, especially again with the notoriety surrounding your game. But two important caveats. One, Among Us is an exception to this rule. Like we've said, do not copy Among Us and expect your game to be, in the Game of the Year category.
I mean, it should. I mean, like it got Game of the Year, right? Like it
Mm-hmm.
was, so, wildly popular 2 years after it released, and it didn't do. It failed horribly in the first year. I mean, why wouldn't you want to copy that?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it could be that you wouldn't get lucky like they would, and that you would, never get lucky 2 years later. It could be that they weren't even likely to get lucky. It could be that, copying any game is pretty much a recipe for failure. That's the number one lesson you guys should learn. Like if you copy somebody else's game, if you copy somebody else's recipe, then that is a recipe for failure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now you
And
can
then
be inspired by somebody's recipe, and like somebody makes, I don't know, a lollipop or whatever, and if you 100% copy that lollipop, but you do it the same or worse kind of thing, nobody's gonna buy your lollipop. Because there's, unlike our world kind of thing where there's only like 2 or 3 different lollipops, in the game dev world, there's millions of lollipops out there. So nobody's going to buy your lollipop. Nobody's even going to know your lollipop even exists. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to make your lollipop significantly better than theirs or significantly different.
Mm-hmm. And then the other point I want to mention in terms of Among Us, and I was trying to look this up. So I'm trying to look at this here because they were releasing updates to Among Us over the last, like in 2019. Wait, huh? I'm just trying to like look at this, and yeah, so we know the game came out in 2018, and a lot of the stuff that they did were bug fixes. They added in some new systems to it, but it really does seem like when Among Us was released, there was like next to nothing in terms of content in that game.
Well, I figure what happened is they were going to support it and everything, but and they were just doing bug fixes and everything, and they had realized that the game had failed horribly, and said, yeah, it would be a waste of time to work on that anymore. Let's work on Among Us 2.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, it blew up, and they're like, like, I mean, like, it reminds me, of like what happened to Chromasia. Like just say that the word of the day, So imagine that I didn't remove it from the store, and actually it's 2 years later now, and imagine today, if I had not removed the store from the store, if it all of a sudden got popular today, kind of thing, and just blew up, kind of thing. Well, I clearly haven't been doing updates on it for forever, kind of thing, because it's a dead game at this point, kind of thing, and it has lots of flaws that I would like to fix, and I think need to be fixed, especially with the art, kind of thing. But you know, I mean, that's kind of where Among Us. I'm pretty sure that's what happened to Among Us, kind of thing.
Yeah. And to John's comment, it was a failure up until September of 2020. And that, again, is one of the challenges of this, is that with post support, I'm not so sure about that. I was
No,
looking.
no, it was a hard failure.
Mm-hmm.
I think it had, I think it had moved. I think something like 200 copies, maybe about twice what Chrome Asia did, and all those copies did not even charge a single dime for half of them, or more than half of them, because they were on Android and free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the copies that did move on Steam were $5, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure they made less money than Chrome Asia did.
Yeah. And springboarding off of Among Us, again, when we talk about multiplayer-based games, and when I pitched this topic to Shark, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was thinking about Back 4 Blood. That is the spiritual successor to Left 4 Dead, and it's being done by the same developers who, incidentally, also did Evolve. And one of the big things that we've seen between that game and even World War Z, I think, could fit into this as well, that World War Z and Back 4 Blood both have already planned out a year's worth of post-release support. World War Z added in new characters, added in new maps, new skins, new guns, stuff like that. And Back 4 Blood is thinking about doing something similar. And again, it's good to think about this stuff now. But one of the risks of post-release support that I don't think we didn't touch too much on it yet for our talk today is that it can make a game worse if you don't know what you're doing. There's a tendency to think, oh, if I just add more stuff to my game, it makes it automatically better. Just throw 500 more levels in and your game will be 500 times better, right, Shark?
Yeah, if you add anything, it's a million times better. Like you can just add more levels and that makes it better.
Yeah. And you have to, again, be very aware, as we said earlier, one, what is the main market value, or what is the value of my game, and how do I expand on that? And two, if I add something, is it going to take away from my game? And some of you may be thinking, well, if I add more to my game, how am I taking away from it? And the thing is, you can do just that if the content you're putting out is bad. We've been comparing this to early access a lot in today's video or in today's show, and there's a very good reason for that. Post-release support, just like early access, is about keeping and growing your momentum in terms of your game. If people keep liking your game, it means you're going to keep buying and being invested in it, which gives you more freedom to develop more content, so they'll keep doing it. You fall behind or you do something bad, you start losing that momentum. And then people aren't going to be so willing to give you more content or more support in the future. Planetary Annihilation was a very big example of this. That because the 1.0 version of that game failed so hard, the developers tried to do a second Kickstarter for, I forget the name of the game, and it failed. It failed hard because of that, because they lost that momentum. I am surprised, again, I always go back to Double Fine with Space-Based DF9. That is the biggest failure Double Fine ever put out, And they managed to weather that storm, I think, really well. But for a lot of studios, if you're trying to keep this going and you start failing, it's a lot harder to kind of regain that momentum than to just keep making baby steps up.
It's momentum works like momentum. You know, if it stops, it's hard to get going again because you don't have the momentum to go.
Even if you're like moving like inches at a time up, you're still moving up.
Mm-hmm. The thing about momentum is it's hard to change it. It's hard to change it to go faster. It's hard to change it to go slower. It's hard to change it to stop it. But, if you happen to stop it, oh man, you are in so much trouble to ever try to get anything done again, because if the momentum stops completely, then you're in an uphill battle to have any chance at doing anything with that game from that point forward. You have to get lucky at that point. And you don't have to just get lucky. You have to get lucky, and you have to do a lot of work.
Yeah, and that's what we saw with Among Us, and why, like, right now they're kind of in this very weird period of, okay, what do we do now? And they've laid out a roadmap, which is good, but again, momentum like this is almost like stardom. It can be very fleeting. You need to keep it going because, as we said, once it stops or it goes into decline, it is very hard to pick that up again because somebody is going to be gunning for you, whether directly or indirectly. And the whole PUBG Fortnite example, I think it works here really well. That, as we all know, PUBG was originally set to be kind of the battle royale king. And then Fortnite came out with a better version, better quality, and they threw all the money and development into that game, and PUBG was left by the wayside. And the problem is that in today's market, what are fans more excited to hear about? A new update to PUBG or a new update to Fortnite?
Personally, I hated PUBG with all my passion, and don't like the developer either, because they've done some really really bad things. Not that Epic hasn't done really bad things either, but and I don't like the core gameplay loop, but I am less. I like I wouldn't touch PUBG with a 20-foot pole. I would probably touch Fortnite with a 20-foot pole, because I actually did get convinced to play it for like 20 minutes by one of my friends, and I did not enjoy it at all. I hated it. But I did touch it, kind of thing, and I would never touch PUBG. Because, I mean, PUBG in the end looked like an asset flip. And it basically was.
We need to get Jack on, I think, for one of these shows. Again, we need to have the We Hate Fortnite show at some point in 2021.
That would have been a better show for 2020.
What was that?
I said that wouldn't have been a better show for 2020?
Yeah. I think it could work any year at this point. And another example of a game that sunk itself, or almost did, was Payday. When a lot of people don't remember, but Payday 2 added in loot boxes and, money or real money purchase only cosmetic options. And it pissed off a lot of people. Very much so. When your game was, retail for 3 to 4 years, and all of a sudden we need to spend more money on just simple gun skins. And it took them a lot of apologizing to get that corrected.
And it's going to take a lot of apologizing from CD Projekt Red to do anything after this. Of course, the fanboys will still be there. Fanboys and fangirl that says, no matter the bugs and all this glitches and everything, this game is perfect.
And as we've said, when you're doing this kind of support over your game, Yeah. You have to really consider where your game is going to go with this. And do you have an endpoint? Because again, unless like as we said, there's a difference between single and multiplayer. For multiplayer, you don't have an endpoint. Because the second you say that your game is done with post support, your multiplayer is dead. That is just unfortunately the truth of how this market works. We've seen this with fighting games, we've seen it with MOBA, Battle Royale, pick any multiplayer based game. The second developers say, well, we're not going to make any more content for it, people aren't going to stick around for it.
Yep. Once your game stops getting updates, kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
you're on basically a 3-year timer, you know, and that 3-year timer is in the shape of a hockey stick kind of thing with a higher point at the top that
Mm-hmm.
slows down really really fast and then slowly tapers out. Hockey, there's a little bitty hockey puck underneath right there at the corner kind of thing to give it a slant to the stick kind of thing. But that is your cells right there. Just straight nosedive down and then a slow taper off across kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then once you get to that end of that 3-year mark, they basically hit zero. I mean, it won't. Depending on your game, it may technically hit zero, and it may not technically hit zero. Like it depends on how many thousands of copies you sell. Like if you just sell 1,000 copies, yeah, it's going to hit zero, probably before it even gets halfway down the hockey stick.
Mm-hmm.
But if you sell, I don't know, 1,000,000 copies, kind of thing, when you get down to the end of the hockey stick, you're probably selling probably still 100 copies each. You know.
Yeah. And there will always be people who will play these games long term. Like you will always have that dedicated hardcore fan base. But again, it goes back to our major point that do I want to develop content that will take me 6 months to a year and only 100 people are going to buy it?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. And again, you have to pick and choose what you want to support.
And Mr. Game and Chat brings up an interesting point. What about Super Brothers Smash? Super Brothers Melee, rather. Super
Mhm.
Smash Brothers Melee. There we go. Um, it hasn't updated in years, and it has a community growing even today. Well, that's because of two reasons. Number one, they got lucky, and a community formed on its own, a esports thing. And number two, they're freaking Nintendo. And if you aren't Nintendo and lucky, that won't happen.
And again, the esports angle is its own, very special section because
Mm-hmm.
esports games, that is definitely another topic in of itself. And maybe at some point we should bring Steve on, that teacher that I'm friends with,
Mm-hmm.
who's running like trying to get like esports in schools to come on and talk about his thoughts on this as well.
Yeah.
That with esports, the whole goal about esports is long-term support. And it's why the esports games that pick off or take off, they're going to survive a very long time.
Esports
But
are basically a different form of live service,
exactly. And
except
it's
for
a base,
Nintendo.
yeah. And Nintendo again with Smash Brothers, they didn't really consider making an esports game with Smash. That was a case of the community kind of picking it up for them.
Do they even
It's
consider that now for the new
in,
Smash Brothers?
in a weird analog, it's kind of like what happened with Among Us. That the developers didn't think Among Us was going to do all that well, after a year or two, and then it just blew up thanks to the community.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's a lucky break.
And lucky breaks are not something you should be aiming for.
Mm-hmm.
You
And
you should be aiming to cross all your I's and your dot all your I's and cross all your T's kind of thing. Or you could do the simply stream thing and cross all your I's and dot all your T's kind of thing.
there you go.
But you need to be aiming for that safely stream mark and not aiming for a streamless stream to where you're going to completely fail. But hey, if you get lucky,
Mm.
you're going to be wildly successful, kind of thing. You don't want to aim for that. You don't want to aim for guaranteed failure with with a chance to buy a lotto ticket or 6 lotto tickets and have them all win simultaneously, and for you to be able to succeed with your game. You can't just win one lotto; you got to win all 6 of them.
Mm-hmm. And another point that I want to bring up that I was just thinking about, that when we talk about post support, episodic content also doesn't fit into this model as well. Because episodic content, it means that instead of you releasing your finished game, 1.0, it means we have to wait an additional year to get said finished game, or in some cases, multiple years.
Yeah. With episodic content, it is a finished game, but it's a finished first part of a game.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically they took they took a finished game and took a Ginsu knife to it and sliced it, like sliced bread, and you're buying one piece of bread at a time until you get the whole entire loaf.
Mm-hmm. And that would be another, different topic to discuss at some point.
Which, of course, some developers, with those, cut those slices so thin that you can see through them.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I know Bindi, which each chapter being like a 5-minute thing. And those were super thin. You could see right through it, and there wasn't anything to it. And the only reason why it even lasted 5 minutes was because it was stretched out through filler content and through, hey, we're not telling you how to solve this puzzle unless you find out, find it and it's hidden somewhere. And made the game frustrating to span out that content length.
Mm-hmm. And you have to, and like to Shark's point, you have to be very mindful again of how you want this game to turn out. Because going back to a single player game, it is perfectly acceptable to say, I will release 3 DLC chapters or 2 expansions, or however you want to say it, and then this game is done. We're done. The slate is clean. We're moving on to our next game. Again, this is one of the advantages single player has in terms of multiplayer, in terms of live service. But conversely, with multiplayer, that post-release support, if it's done properly, can keep your game supported and funded for years to come. It's just going to be a whole lot harder, as we've said, to get it to that point.
Yeah, there's another angle that we can look at this, which is definitely not the same thing. It doesn't count as post-release support, but it does have a lot of parallels with it, and it is very, very similar, and that's mod support. Because when you have mod support, that can allow like if your mod support actually takes off with your game taking off to begin with, then they're going to keep on, giving your game more and more content for you, which is going to, have the same effect as long-term support without you actually supporting it. And that, again, you have to get lucky, but on top of getting lucky, you don't have to get super lucky. It's a minor level of lucky. You have to get a minor level of lucky. You have to have a very, very successful game to begin with a large community to begin with, and you have to have mod support in there. And preferably like something like the Steam Workshop integrated kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which means that you're probably not going to do well on consoles.
Yeah. And mod support for games is certainly that is definitely another interesting topic, another little microverse to talk about. And it can certainly help to improve games, especially if you get, as Shark said, if you get lucky, if you get some very talented people in your community who are making content for you, or just even making really high quality mods, that can go a long way towards keeping a game supported, even if you are not the one who's going to be doing that supporting. But conversely, you're basically kind of outsourcing your game success to people who they have no stake in your company. So if one day they decide, I'm done, I don't want to make anything else more for this game, and then you're left going, oh, who's going to work on our game now? Are we going to do it? And you're in some big trouble.
Yeah. And, Factorio definitely took off like with that. And, Oxygen Not Included took off like that. KSP took off like that. But the thing you have to realize is that for the most part, those were really solid games before the mod support. And they were really successful. So you really can't count on mod support unless your game is already very, very successful. Not like,
and again,
it doesn't have to be like KSP, levels of success kind of thing. But it needs to be quite successful. You need to, basically, the way that works is you release a game and it becomes a commercial success. And at that point, you have nothing more vested in it, kind of thing. And after that point, modders keep it, relevant and everything. They keep on modding for it. And through that, you keep on making money off of it. So you're getting more money off your commercial success. You're getting more commercial success off of it rather than, this is what's going to make my game successful. Now, this will be extra profit after your game is successful. But if you don't release a successful game at the first beginning, it's probably not going to make you commercially successful. Not unless you were right on that line to where it's like, if we just made $3,000 more, we would have broke even, kind of thing. Well, maybe we'll get that in the next 3 years worth of sales, or next year worth of sales, kind of thing. Whatever, where mod support could end up taking you over that in like a couple of days potentially, but it could also not. But
and you have to consider, again, as we've said throughout our show today, that post-release support, the goal is that the game has to be good at launch and you're making it better. Like with mod support, as we said a second ago, if your game is horrible, why would anyone want to make mods for it?
And another thing about mod support is not good for every game. Mod support tends to be best in the same way that for the same games that is best for early access. Which the games that are best for early access are those that can be replayed infinitely. They have, like, imagine if Binding of Isaac has mod support.
I'm pretty sure it does.
Oh, does it? Well, then, that could be probably part of the reason why it has so much continued life, kind of thing. Like, anything that has infinite replayability, your story games and whatnot, those are not going to have infinite replayability. Mod support isn't going to do anything for it, really. I meant, they're not saying that you're not going to have modders, because you may have modders, kind of thing, but it's not going to do anything to really benefit your game, because like you see some AAA RPGs kind of thing that or AA RPGs that end up getting modders that make a few mods for it, kind of thing. Like there's mods for Final Fantasy, the original Final Fantasy VII, not to be confused with the train wreck called the remake. But there's mods for the original that will swap in better textures and graphics.
XCOM is another really good example of the power of mods, especially with XCOM 2. And one of the bigger points, again, is that the quality, like as Shark said, that what your game is about will greatly determine whether or not post-release support is viable. If you are making, let's say, a very story-driven, linear, let's say it's a 30-hour game, and you think to yourself, okay, this is great, should we spend the next year making 10 more hours of very high-quality, very polished content to add to this game? Now, on one hand, that could bring people back to it. But on the other hand, if somebody already completely engrossed and enjoyed a 30-hour story, will they come back for 10 more hours? And it's a tough question. The Witcher being another really solid example. They did a lot of post-release support and DLC for The Witcher 3. And it got praised a lot for that level of content they put out.
Yeah. I don't I don't think that if you make a story based game that you're completely out of it at that point. But it becomes a lot harder. If you're adding more story content at the end game or just in the middle of the game, you're probably not going to do very well. That's probably not going to help because the fact is most people didn't, complete the story kind of thing. So most of them won't even get to experience that end part kind of thing that you've added to it. And if it's in the middle part, then likely, the people who already have gotten to the end might go back to experience it and find out that it's more boring because they've already gotten way past that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Where, the ones that have not gotten to, beaten the game, they've already bounced off of the game and they're probably not going to return. And those who, are just bought the game and everything, that would probably be the only ones that would actually really get the benefit out of that. And, the different, I think though, like side content can work, kind of thing. Like a Halloween event or a Christmas event kind of thing to where it's a special side thing all on its own that will apply benefits into the real game, but it doesn't specifically take part in direct succession.
Mm-hmm. And that is very important. Like, as an example would be something like Fail Better Game. That for each one of their titles, they release new story content. And what they do is that the story content is kind of integrated into the base game as these little vignettes. And for them, again, it is side story content. It's not them saying, here's our 40-hour long story, here's 20 more hours of story on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
And to John's point about there being games that really counted on and flopped. Yeah, we've seen games, I think we talked already about a few of them, like Batman Arkham Origins. Were there another one that we discussed at that time?
I don't know.
Again, there's so many games to cover. I know I mentioned Space Base DF9, but that's an early access failure, not a post-release failure. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Any other points that we haven't discussed yet, Shark?
Let me think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like events, things that get integrated in, essentially like what I call like supplemental content could work really well in story-driven games. Add in a new thing that can show up in Area 3 or elements along those lines.
Yeah. Or just like a Christmas, Halloween, holiday event kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're running a live service kind of thing, those things to a point are expected.
Yep. Oh, yes.
To a point. They're not completely expected because, like, you've never seen any Magic the Gathering cards with Halloween outfits or Christmas hats kind of thing. I think you might have seen a Christmas thing in Hearthstone, but I think it was only once. But, like, it doesn't, but, like, other games, like, yeah, like, they're practically required.
Mm-hmm. And like we said, with multiplayer titles, you need to be planning out what your content is going to be while you're developing your game. Because the second your game hits 1.0, people are going to say, what's next? What do you got planned for me?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have an answer, your game is dead. Because the second people say, there's no new content coming. Why should I stick around?
Yep.
And it is very tricky in terms, again, of where you want to go with it. And I think that's another point I want to like spend a few minutes on. Because like going back to the Atomic Crops example, and even something like with XCOM as well, that it's easy to sit there and think, okay, we have 50 guns or we have 20 cosmetic options. Let's just add 30 more of this, 20 more of that. 1, 2, 3, we're done. But what we've seen developers do, again, with supplemental content, with expanding on games, is say to themselves, where can we go with this to add, a lot more value? And this is where this idea of developing new systems come in. Again, with XCOM 2, and the War of the Chosen, no, I could bet money on this and say that no fan of XCOM 2 was sitting there thinking to themselves, you know what? A Nemesis system from Shadow of War would fit really well in my XCOM game. And Firaxis decided to do that, and it blew everybody's minds that it was added to XCOM 2 as an experience. And when you think about your game like that, when you can change it and make it immeasurably better, that is another goal of post-release support. Like when people talk about XCOM 2, they basically say, you want the DLC. It adds so much to that game. And that is what you want your post-release support to be, that even though your game at 1.0 is great, it's basically saying, okay, here's a 90 average game. This DLC puts it at 120% in terms of quality.
Mm-hmm. And it's really about upping the percentage, but you already have to be at 100% to begin with.
Yeah.
If you're not at 100%, you're in trouble.
You're bailing out a sinking ship at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another really scary point about this, and this goes back to the Cyberpunk, that if you are in emergency ship sinking mode, it means you're not in making this game better mode. So if you spend 3 months, 6 months, a year fixing a game, that's a year that you could have spent making your game even better. And like we've said, this is how you lose momentum. And it's a lot harder. Again, I'm sure, let's be real here, that CD Projekt Red is not going to be closing anytime soon. This is not going to kill the company.
No, because they had record, pre-orders, because pre-order culture, they had, and they have like tons and tons of fanboys and fangirls, and they also have just
they're not
massive
going
numbers.
away.
Yeah, not anytime soon. They might be in trouble their next game, but trouble doesn't mean they're going away.
Yeah. Now, if you, for instance, if you're a 5-10 person development team and you screw up as bad as CD Projekt Red, you're most likely going to be a dead company
Forever, pretty much.
You don't have that clout.
Yeah, you have the negative clout to where anything that comes out after that is going to probably be noticed and referred to as with your other, and it's going to instantly die no matter how good it is. You make your next game perfect, which there is no perfect game, but you can make your next game perfect, and it will likely horribly, horribly fail because you failed like CD Projekt Red did on the game before. That company's a dead company pretty much at that point, and you need to go work somewhere else. And then, and I would not restart your company. Restart a company, just to take, make a new name and same exact otherwise kind of thing, because people are going to catch on to that very, very quickly. And, that's not going to work either. You need to go work for somebody else, try to rebuild your reputation kind of thing. release some things that, with other people that are good kind of thing, and then build a new company after that if you want to give it
Yeah.
another go.
And again, it kind of, I think our moral for today is that it's all about that momentum. If you do good, if you're keeping things straight, you're making improvements, it's going to lead to things getting better for you. You lose that momentum or you get stuck, it becomes so much harder to keep going.
Yep.
And Shark mentioned Auction Not Included a few minutes ago, and yet Clay Entertainment is an incredible example of keeping their momentum strong.
Oh yeah, they have incredible momentum right now.
Grifflin's Auction Not Included, Don't Starve Together.
Don't Starve regular, solo,
Mm-hmm. I
alone.
wish Invisible Ink, but that's another rant in me that we don't have the time for today.
And
But
because of that, nobody ever notices the what, Don't Step on Lava or whatever that one is.
Hot Lava.
Hot Lava. Nobody really notices that one because their momentum just, carried them right through it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that good of a game, but it wasn't a bad game either. So it didn't hurt their momentum, but it certainly didn't help it either. It was neutral kind of thing, and rest of their momentum just kept on carrying them through like that game didn't even exist. But they still got paid for that game.
Yeah. To Mojo's point, no, they should go retro. They should go Betamax Project Red.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Clay again, like they are definitely the poster child for early access and post-release support in terms of getting those two aspects really well.
And mod support.
Oh yes. And like we've said, if your game is great, it's going to attract people to develop content for it. And they develop content for it, it can bring more people in.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just, like we've said, you can't just half-ass everything and expect it all to just magically fall into place.
What about Blu-ray Project Red? Or would that be Red Ray? Or would that be Blu-ray Project Blue?
Hopefully they don't call themselves a Project Neon.
I really missed out on that name. You really should have been Project Neon instead of Project Triad.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know that it was going to be full of neon at that point.
Just automatically assume your games will have neon in it. It's perfect.
Yeah, maybe the next game will be Project Neon and it'll have no neon in it at all.
Just confuse everybody right there.
Yeah.
And trying to think if there's anything else regarding post-release support. We talked about single player. We talked about multiplayer. I do want to get your thoughts on this, Shark, about what I just said with Atomic Crops and the XCOM example. That do you think developing entirely new systems for your game, you think that is a wise strategy, or do you think that's more of an exception to the rule that we've talked about?
I don't think it's necessarily an exception or wise. I think it depends kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on how successful your game is, how much that's going to add to your game, and the potential sales that it could bring in kind of thing, which means that it really, like, if your game fails if your game is not a commercial success at that point, I think it's absolutely a bad move kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where if it is a commercial success, it may or be a good move, it may be a bad move, it may be somewhere in between. That's, it depends on what you're adding, how you're adding it, how optional it is, how not optional it is, because if it's forced and it's bad, then it's really horrible. If it's bad and it's optional, then people can skip past it. They can ignore it. Where if it's good and it's optional, then people can ignore it. If it doesn't go with their personal taste, or they can just, or they can experience the goodness of it, and whatnot. And it's not that I'm suggesting making the optional kind of thing, but I'm just saying that considering that, it makes a bad less bad, and it makes a good less good kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, be very careful is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's what we kind of see like Paradox Interactive does with their big name strategy games. That they'll release that base game, and then you got at least 2 years or more of DLC expansions and post-release support coming. Fans, it's not even it is 100% assumed at this point that when Paradox releases a game, there's going to be content coming down the line. And like you just said, it is a double-edged sword. That if you release content that's so amazing and it's part of the base game, it's going to make that better. If you release it and it's horrible, then you are basically, you're injecting poison into your game.
Mm-hmm.
But if you make it optional, then you run that risk that maybe somebody doesn't want to spend $20 more on your game, and it doesn't really work for them. And it is part of that risk that you have to weigh in terms of how you want to approach what your post-release time is going to go toward.
Mm-hmm.
And for the chat watching this live or recorded, can you think of examples of games that did really well or really poorly with post-release support? And for the recorded people, leave a comment. Let us know what you think.
Yeah. I think that's about it.
Yeah, I think I'm about out. For the chat, any questions you have for us regarding post-release development or post-release support that we can touch on? Because otherwise, I think we are right at the end here. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to discuss quickly. We talked about Clay. We've done single, multiplayer. We talked about good support. We talked about bad. The kind of content you develop.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've hit just about everything. Oh, as an example of bad support, I want to mention briefly Vermintide 2's DLC. Let me see if I can find the name of it really fast. That this one was just uniformly hated by the community. Now, fortunately, it was optional, but it kind of hurt their momentum. That it did not do well for them. Here it is. Oh, it is mostly negative. The Winds of Magic DLC. And you have to be really careful how you bundle stuff as well. Because if you have one really bad thing and three really good things, that bad thing, as the expression goes, one rotten apple spoils the bunch. People aren't going to buy bad stuff for your game for maybe the 30% good that it offers.
Yeah. There's actually a psychological study done,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't remember the actual numbers from this, so don't quote me on this, but I believe what it was for every one bad thing in your life, it takes 10 good things to even that out.
Mm-hmm.
Like so basically for every one lottery ticket you lose on, you have to win with 10 of them to feel like you broke even, which is
Yeah.
the more inverse of what happens kind of thing. And the way to send yourself into this spiral of depression is basically go buy a lottery tickets.
And like we were talking about this on stream a few nights ago about being really excited about Dark Tide from Fat Shark, and we got hope they don't have any Winds of Magic ideas planned for it, because right now that DLC is mostly negative, both recent and all reviews. Like, it's rare for me to see a double red on a game these days.
Yeah, my cousin there needs to lose a little bit of weight. He needs to stop being such a fat shark and be more normal shark.
Lean shark?
Average. He could be an average shark.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to necessarily be lean, but needs to stop being fat. Needs to get off the couch. At least every
And
once in a while.
even with that expansion, adding in new stuff to the game, it still pissed off a lot of people. And like we've said, if one expansion or one DLC kills a lot of that momentum, you're going to be starting in the negative for your next bit of DLC. And again, if it's a multiplayer game, that is magnified because you want people to keep playing your game. If they stop playing it, there goes any reason to develop post-release support, and then the downward spiral effect just happens really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Mike.
And Mike, Happy New Year.
Mm-hmm. So I think with that, I can't think of anything else to discuss in terms of post-release support. Vermintide was bad. CD Projekt's going to be hurting, but not exactly dead or dying from this.
Oh, they're definitely well into the green. They were well into the green on day one. Although I'm wondering how much the PlayStation giving refunds to everything, affected that. Actually, Xbox did too, didn't it? And
I don't know they ever did.
I'm actually surprised Sony did. Really
And I think
surprised
it was
Sony
just
did.
too much. I think too much negative PR for them to ignore.
And Sony pretty much seems to love negative PR these days. I could, I think it's more they had an issue with the developer, not the negative PR.
Yeah, but again, I think to wrap things up, at least my final thoughts, when you consider post-release support, always look at kind of where you want your game to go. And again, look at the momentum that it's carrying. If things have slowed down or there's like no interest, it may just be better to move on. It's always nice to get free stuff from a developer, but don't release free stuff that's going to cost you, all the bulk of your profit that you made on your game.
Yeah, I do have one small point on if you are going the live service model kind of thing. Make sure that or not even that you're going the live service. There's potential for you to go live service kind of thing. I mean, there's potential for my current game, the Continuum, to go that way. But, it could also, fail horribly out the gate and never go anywhere kind of thing. But I'm making sure I'm not working on any content for, any future sets kind of thing or anything like that. But I am making sure that there is no dead end paths in front of me so that, and I have at least somewhat of an idea of if it becomes successful, what's going to happen and what am I going to do. It's a plan to plan, basically. You know what I mean? Which means that I'm not going to totally be caught off my feet when it, if it happens to blow up successfully. I'm just going to be totally caught off my feet. Only one totally instead of like 8. And that will put me in a lot better position when that happens.
Yeah.
If that happens.
And again,
and if it fails, it's not going to put me in bad shape either because like I didn't invest a lot into that next, into the live service part.
Hello, Malthus. Yeah, and again, that's what when I told Chris Park, he did the very same thing. That he said, okay, what is 1.0 my game looks like? What's the content that I want to develop after the fact? And he basically planned his game out accordingly. That 1.0 is 1.0. That is a completed game. That is a done game. It is exactly what I want my game to be. The additional content is the icing on the cake.
Mm-hmm.
If it works, yay, it's going to make it better. If it doesn't work, you can just take that off or, let it die, and you still have 1.0 being a great game.
Yeah.
And like we said, it's all about that momentum. You don't want to put stuff out that's going to hurt your game. Because if you start hurting your game, you're basically killing any chance post-release support is going to help it at that point.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think
Right.
that's about it.
Do you have any other final thoughts you want to say?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, then I think we are finished for this week's episode of the Safely Extreme Cast. So if you have any suggestions for topics for us to cover in future episodes, please let us know in the comments. And as always, if you want to talk directly with us, Discord is the best way to do that. You'll find Discord links for my Discord as well as Shark's Discord in the description down below.
And also down below, you'll find links to both his and my YouTube channel where you can watch this podcast on. And you can subscribe to it. And if you want to catch it live, you can ring the bell on both of our channels, kind of thing. If you, we also have links to our Twitters down there. And, what else do we have down there?
My book description, the Patreon. You have your YouTube, Discord, and Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And
if you join my Discord kind of thing, you can play Neon Continuum hopefully next month. It didn't work out this month, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot larger chance that it's going to work out next month on February 6th. Will be our next step chat, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. Can we show them off a card? The spinny card that I got?
Maybe. Let's see. It was in the chat you sent me, right?
Yeah.
See, is it actually on I can kind of show it.
If you enlarge it and then you swap.
All right, you're going to see a blank screen for a second, everybody. Hopefully this will work. Where is Discord? No, that's not it. No. There we go.
Okay, I got it on mine.
I got it on mine too. There you go. There's your Nog neon logo to go out on.
Yep. And hopefully next month's Step Chat, hopefully we'll be able to play it. And should be interesting.
All right. But if you want to catch these shows live, they are around 4:30 ET on our respective channels. And if you want to catch our news show, Indie Inquiries, where we look at indie game marketing and provide advice and review of upcoming indie games, you can catch that Thursday starting around 3:30 ET.
Thanks, John. Anyway, join the Discord if you want to potentially play the game and not just see a spinny card.
Or if you just want to see a spinning card, just watch this. Just keep watching this episode.
Yeah, and you could actually you could go to the Discord and see it in, this is the low-res version, by the way. There's a high-res version on the Discord kind of thing, where you can see this in uncompressed version, because Discord won't allow this. It's too powerful for Discord, because I think Discord only lets you put up 8 megabytes on a image or GIF kind of thing, but the actual image is, I think, like 26. So we had to compress it a lot to get it down to 8, and that's what you're looking at right now. You're looking at the 8, and mind you that you're looking at this 8 through YouTube's crappy compression, so it's probably more like 2 what you're seeing now. So just imagine if you joined the Discord and got to look at the full 26 kind of thing. Looks so much better. Trust me.
We need a him Nog icon for our streams.
Yeah.
There you go. All right, everybody. But I will be back later tonight for my regular game streams and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.
See ya.